Welcome into a special edition of the Fast Lane. Trey Lyle here with you, joined with the man, the myth, the legend, a good friend of mine from back in my college days on campus in Blacksburg. I nicknamed him Youngblood DC. His other nickname is D Cunna, how you can follow him on Twitter. David Cunningham, the managing editor for Sideline.com. We're going to talk previewing the Virginia Tech Hokies in a very intriguing season with a lot of storylines to cover. First, David, how are you doing, my man? It's always good to see your face, over Zoom at least. Eventually, we'll hopefully get to see you in person as this season unfolds.
Yeah, man. First, Trey, it's great to talk to you again. I feel like we haven't seen each other in person in a couple of years now, but I miss you. I appreciate you having me on as always. It's great talking with you. And yeah, I'm doing well. Excited for the season to finally get underway. Obviously, Virginia Tech has a big season opener against North Carolina, and it's some exciting stuff going on in Blacksburg.
Yeah, let's hop right into it with the offense. Headlined by, of course, very interesting player in Braxton Burmeister. Obviously, the departures of Hendon Hooker and Quincy Patterson cleared the way for Braxton Burmeister, who really took hold of the team. And it would have been interesting to see if Virginia Tech played a bowl game. Would have Braxton had started? I would think he would have after his performance against Virginia. Inconsistency at the beginning of the year. It didn't look his best, obviously, with Hendon Hooker battling some injuries, but he came on strong at the end of the year. And it might have been due to, obviously, that COVID spell he wasn't able to rely on his athleticism enough, which is a big part of his game. What do you want to see from him, or what are your expectations for Braxton as we head into the season?
Yeah, well, from what the coaching staff has said about Braxton, from what his teammates have said about him, it sounds to me like Braxton Burmeister can be the best quarterback for Virginia Tech has had in the Justin Fuente era. And that's kind of saying a lot, considering they had Gerard Evans, who was a solid player, both athletically and throwing the ball. Josh Jackson, Ryan Willis, Hendon Hooker. Now it's Braxton Burmeister's time. And Justin Fuente said that this is the most comfortable he's ever been throwing the ball at Virginia Tech. Braxton Burmeister has been in this offense for 3 seasons now. He enters his 3rd season. He sat out and redshirted because he transferred from Oregon. Last year, he got in the mix a little bit. He started the first couple games of the season because other players were out with COVID, and Hooker being one of them, and then he got injured. But that injury really helped him because he had to sit on the sideline and couldn't do anything but learn the playbook. So when he came back in, when he was finally healthy again and came back and played against Clemson and Virginia, he was fantastic. So I'm really excited to see what he brings to the table. I think he really opens this offense up. I think his knowledge of the playbook, his knowledge of the schemes, of what Brad Cornelsen wants to do, and his athleticism. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the tweet, but Virginia Tech a couple weeks ago tweeted out the top speeds, top mile per hour clocks over the offseason in the summer. Braxton Burmeister was atop the list. He clocked the fastest miles per hour on the entire team, and he's a quarterback. He's clearly athletic. And he has a great arm, can really read the game, and he has great chemistry, not just with the offensive line, but with the receivers too. So I'm excited to watch him play, considering, after not getting to see him much at the beginning of the season last year, he did play, but then he was missing for the big chunk of the season. And then he comes back and has 2 really great performances right at the end against Clemson and Virginia. I think Braxton's going to be one of the bright spots on this Virginia Tech offense, and he's going to need to be, because this Tech offense is going to run through that quarterback.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I think his athleticism is something that people don't really talk about, just because, there's a reason he went to Oregon, folks. Like, they look for a certain type of player. And the only reason why he didn't start there is because there was a guy named Justin Herbert, starting ahead of him, who may or may not be, a sneaky NFL MVP coming up, and is, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. So his athleticism, he got 99th on the freaks list by the Athletics, Bruce Friedman, who's one of the most connected people in the country. And to hit that list just shows, like, the type of athleticism they're getting. And you look at the best year of offense for Virginia Tech, I would argue was the year with Gerard Evans in terms of his ability to, run the ball and throw the ball efficiently. Obviously, I think the run game will be there, but it's the expectation to grow the passing game with a good group of pass catchers, which we'll get into. But what do you expect from him just from a passing point of view and improving his efficiency?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things about Brad Cornelson's offense and the way it runs is the run game and the passing game help each other. So you to be able to open up the offense, you have to run the ball effectively when you need to, and then pass the ball effectively as well. And I think in the past you've had two sets of quarterbacks. You've had the very, very athletic quarterbacks in Hendon Hooker, in Gerard Evans. You had the very, very more I guess more so pocket passers, not as athletic in Ryan Willis and Josh Jackson. He's like a hybrid Burmeister. He can do both, and he's got a great arm. And one of the things talking with him and James Mitchell at ACC Media Day down in Charlotte, and talking with a lot of the receivers just in preseason, um, there's really great chemistry between Burmeister and between these receivers. He's got a lot of really talented targets. It's just, can he get the ball to them? And I think he understands the system. I mean, this yes, Hendon Hooker and Ryan Willis were in the system for a couple of years, as was Josh Jackson, but Braxton Burmeister, came in, sat out a year, ran the scout team offense, came in last year, learned the offense and digested it even more, and now he finally has his opportunity to go show it. And I think he's got a great arm and he knows the playbook now. I I think the running game and him being athletic is going to open up things in the passing game. And I think the bigger question is not can he get the ball to his receivers? It's can the receivers be consistent enough to help carry this offense where it's not just, we're going to have to run the ball in a lot of situations because we don't have receivers reliable enough, which has been in the past somewhat of a problem.
As we move on to pass catchers, obviously headlined by James Mitchell, who's a premier tight end in all of college football. Obviously, this is building sort of a pipeline. You think of Dalton Keene, and then you can go all the way back to Bucky Hodges as well in terms of this tight end position. And James Mitchell might be the best one all around. He headlines a solid group, an underrated group, I think, on this team of pass catchers with Trey Turner, who's been one of the best wide receivers, probably best wide receiver for the team the last couple of years. Tavion Robinson, who had a great season last year. And, the biggest unknown, I would say, but, the one who has the most buzz is, a guy who's supposed to be dynamic for Virginia Tech last year, who's coming back, is Jaden Payote. So what do you feel about this pass catching group, and their ability heading in and their expectations heading into this season?
Yeah, well, you hit James Mitchell first. And I think, James Mitchell, undoubtedly the best tight end in the ACC, one of the best tight ends. You could say he's the best tight end in the country. And I think the tight end room is one of, if not the deepest room on the team. You've got Nick Gallo and Drake Julius behind him, and all three have game reps, and all three are really, really talented guys. And not just blocking, but also catching the ball. So the tight end room is in really good shape. As far as the receivers go, it's interesting. Last season, maybe it was a combination of Hendon Hooker not being as comfortable as previous quarterbacks throwing the ball. But Virginia Tech, they had Khalil Herbert, yes, to rely on. But there was times where Virginia Tech couldn't really get anything going in the passing game consistently. And I think that falls back on the receivers. Trey Turner's been around for a couple of years now, and it seems like he's put up the same numbers time and time again, that he hasn't really improved. I'm interested to see if Trey Turner can take that next step and not just put up the same numbers that he's been putting up for the past couple of years, but put up better numbers and be that go-to guy when Braxton Burmeister is in a 3rd and 7 and needs to have a go-to target. He can throw to Trey Turner and know that Trey Turner is going to get the first down. Then you bring in guys like Tavion Robinson, and he had the most catches and the most receiving yards on the team last year. So Tavion Robinson is a really talented guy. I'm interested to see how he progresses. He's been here less than Trey Turner. So, and then you go into Jaden Payote, like you said. I think he's going to be the question mark, because if he can be really, really good, if he can, become, or I guess provide something that Virginia Tech doesn't have already, that's going to be great for the Hokies. But I think you've got 3 solid options there. Then you even look farther down the line. It's Caleb Smith, a Richmond guy. Caleb Smith has been fantastic when Tech's needed him to be. I think he can step up in a veteran role and increase his receptions from last year. I think he's, he said in the offseason that, he really had a great spring and great summer because he slimmed down a lot, because he didn't really, he wasn't in the best shape when he came back to school before the 2020 season. Now he's in great shape. Then you go into the freshmen, Dwayne Lofton, Jalen Jones. You've got some really talented freshmen in that class. I'm interested to see who stands out and if Virginia Tech wide receivers, somebody, or maybe not just one guy, but maybe two guys, can become consistent options where, again, if Braxton Burmeister's under pressure, he knows I can get the ball to this guy and they are going to gain yardage. Because I don't think it's a question now of whether or not Tech offense can get the ball to the receivers. It's, are the receivers going to be consistent enough?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail. And then obviously the biggest hole from this offense from last season, well, one of two, as we'll get to the offensive line at the end, which is still a really good unit. Khalil Herbert, I mean, a breakout star for Virginia Tech, where they've been looking for a running game, every year under Justin Fuente. It was really the passing game carrying them. And this is the first year that they were a dominant ball team. They were one of the best teams in terms of running the ball in the entire country. Obviously, a four-headed group, a solid group, I would argue, a pretty deep group considering the history of Virginia Tech in terms of the running back position, especially under Fuente. Obviously, Keyshawn King coming back, the transfer last year. Jalen Holston, who's actually slimmed down a lot this summer and is looking to be more efficient. And then obviously Marco Lee. What do you feel about this running back room in terms of their success heading into this season?
I think it's difficult because, it's hard to replace a 1,000-yard rusher like Khalil Herbert. You don't just plug in guys and automatically gain 1,000 yards. But I do think Khalil Herbert, set the tone in that running back room. I think Raheem Blackshear and Jalen Holston, they're obviously 1 and 2. And I think Holston showed at the end of the season that he can be a really consistent back at times. Now, can he keep up his consistency in 2021? I think Raheem Blackshear can provide something we didn't get to see a lot of last year. I think Khalil Herbert took a lot of so many of the carries that we didn't get to see a lot of what those other guys provide. I think Raheem Blackshear, you can line him up in the slot, but you can also play him at tailback. He's speedy, he's quick. And then you've got a guy like Keyshawn King, who did not play much at all last year. And I think he's finally grown up and gotten his act together. He's become more mature. He's become the guy that, Justin Fuente and Brad Cornelson and Adam Lechtenberg have been raving about, saying he's got the talent. He just needs to become more consistent. And then Marco Lee, a guy who worked off, got a lot of really positive work in the offseason. I think he's obviously, right behind those guys, but he's still working for a starting role. I think it's going to be a question of, is this going to be a running back by committee approach, or is this going, which it seems like it's going to be, or is this going to be one or two guys, maybe a Jalen Holston or Raheem Blackshear standing out? But if Keyshawn King can get his act together and become more consistent, I think it's a positive, and I think it's really important. If Jalen Holston or Raheem Blackshear, or maybe both of them, can just become more consistent, I think that's the bottom line across the board, whether it's wide receivers or running backs. Consistency. Can these guys be more consistent? Because that's what Virginia Tech has been lacking in the running game, besides Khalil Herbert last year. Virginia Tech lacked consistency. I mean, back to the David Wilson days. Before that, it was fine. But once David Wilson left, Virginia Tech has never had any consistency in the run game. And, it hasn't been a running back by committee approach. But I do think Tech is better set now than they have been in the past. And I also think you got to think about Braxton Burmeister. He's quick on his feet, too. He's going to be able to gain some yards in the running game, too. It's not just going to be, handing the ball off. He's going to pull a little bit on read options. So you got some dynamic options there. Again, I think it's both sides, the passing game and the running game, both need to be more consistent in certain areas. If they can do that, I think it'll open a lot of things. But if you run into situations where you're playing really, really talented defenses and one part of the game, say the running game, isn't gaining yards at all, well, that puts you in a tight corner and you're one-dimensional. So I think just in general, Tech just needs to be more consistent running the ball.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. And moving on to the offensive line, which was the strength of this team last season. I mean, what an offensive line. Inserting Brock Hoffman at center, coming back. Obviously the infamous kind of, he had to take a transfer year and everything that surrounded that. But you lose 3 starters, and that's a big hole to replace, obviously, you lose a first round pick in Christian Darrisaw, who is your stalwart at left tackle. That's not easy to replace. And then Doug Nestor and Brian Hudson heading to the portal. But 93 combined starts coming back across the offensive line. I mean, basically every guy coming back has had starter experience. This is an experienced offensive line, headlined obviously by Letitus Smith, Brock Hoffman, Luke Tinta, Silas Danzy, all really have NFL hopes, especially the top three of those, as I mentioned. This was a really good offensive line that was very efficient last season. What do you feel about this offensive line? Do you still think it could be one of the strengths of the team?
Yeah, I think the offensive line, I think the question is there enough depth? I think that's the question. But I do think this is a talented group still. There are 4 guys in that group that have over 1,000 career snaps. You've got Brock Hoffman, who has over 2,000 career snaps. Lecitus Smith, who's right there with 1,900. Then you have Johnny Jordan, the transfer from Maryland, at 1,200, and then Luke Tenuta, almost at 1,200. And Luke Tenuta's only played 3 years. So you've got a ton of talent there. You got Tyrell Smith and Silas Danzy that have both played, Silas more than Tyrell, that have both played solid minutes. I think the question is, what happens if somebody gets injured? Because injuries happen all the time, especially with COVID last year. It was difficult when players missed time. Tech had so much offensive line depth that they could rotate a guy in, plug and play a little bit, and it didn't really impact them that much. Now, what happens if a guy like Luke Tenuta gets hurt at left tackle? Can Parker Clemens step up? Or, where does Johnny Jordan fit in? I think this is a solid unit. And Vance Vice was joking with us, with the media last week, just about how, right now there's about 7 or 8 guys that can plug and play and can fit in here or there and can rotate around. I think this is a talented group, but the question is, there is a lot of experience there. The question is there enough depth there? If a guy goes down here or there, or when somebody gets tired and somebody needs to be rotated out, what's going to happen? Because the guys behind him, Parker Clemens, Caden Moore, Johnny Jordan, Jesse Hansen, and Darrell Bailey, or Bob Schick, those guys don't have experience besides Johnny Jordan. None of those guys. I mean, there's 5 guys on the team that have recorded career starts. It's Tenuta, Smith, Hoffman, Danzy, and Johnny Jordan. There's 6 guys that have recorded career snaps. Or 7, excuse me. Jesse Hansen has 5. But outside of that core group of 6, it drops off. A lot of talented youngsters. The question is, can Vance Vice get those guys ready enough? I think the depth issue is going to be a question. I think Virginia Tech will be talented offensively up front. Obviously, you miss a guy like Christian Darrisaw, and then you have 2 transfers in Doug Nestor and Brian Hudson. But I do think this is going to be a talented Virginia Tech offensive line. Nonetheless, the depth is going to be the question.
That's a good way to summarize the offense, David. And moving on to the defense, year 2 under Justin Hamilton, and it was hit or miss for this defense, quite frankly. A lot of miscommunication, a lot of assignment misses, and that was hard to see for a defense that looked so good and had a lot of momentum going into the season. Obviously, when you lose your top 2 corners heading in basically for a majority of the year, that does not help. But let's start with the weakest position by far, maybe even though they have the best player on the defense. It's defensive end. They have, obviously, all ACC caliber Amari Barno, who was phenomenal last year in his limited snaps, which people have not talked about a lot. He played a limited amount of snaps, all things considered, as kind of the backup defensive end, and was one of the best TFL tackle for loss guys in the country. How big of a year can this guy have?
Yeah, Amari Barno is one of the best defensive ends in the ACC. I mean, he's preseason All ACC for a reason, and he's 6'6". There's not many defensive ends that are that big, that have that athleticism. He's speedy. I think he recorded the 5th best mile per hour on the team. So he's fast, he's quick, he's athletic, and I think he's poised for another year. I think he can be one of the best defensive ends, not just in the ACC but in the country. And obviously it depends on how fast he progresses, but he's got a lot of talent. And I think one of the things that people are underestimating or maybe haven't talked about is that Amari Barno, playing on one side, well, teams are going to have to have to adjust to that. Offensive lines are going to have to adjust to cover it, which opens up stuff on the other side of the line. You got a guy like Tavion Robinson coming back. Everybody's been raving about how he's back, how Tavion Robinson is back, and Tavion Robinson, was fantastic in 2019 and in 2018 when he played. He missed last year, to go be with his father who had some health issues, but Tavion Robinson's back. That provides a lot of strength. I think Virginia Tech set at the defensive end, but I think it comes back to another question of, is there enough depth there behind them? There aren't a lot of guys that have played, there are some guys that have played some snaps like Jalen Griffin, Eli Adams, but there's not, somebody who you can really plug in and go, this person is going to, bring the same, workload that Barno and Garbutt do. But I think Barno, he might have a breakout season. He's really poised to have a fantastic year. He had a great offseason. He gained some more weight, which was important. So I think Amari Barno can really be an X factor on this defense for Virginia Tech.
And obviously inside, they have some good depth there. They like the hockey style substitutions. A big get for them was Clemson transfer Jordan Williams, who I think he former top talent. He left Clemson because he was surrounded by guys who could play in the NFL, and he's one of them. He's that talented. If Clemson wanted him that bad, he's got a lot of talent. Noel Pollard showed some flashes last season, and then obviously Mario Kendricks and Josh Huga. How do you feel about the defensive tackle unit?
Yeah, I think they're good, but I think it comes down to depth. They've got three guys: Jordan Williams, Mario Kendricks, and Norrell Pollard, that have played a ton of snaps. Pollard started more games in his career than Mario Kendricks or Jordan Williams, and Jordan Williams went and won a national championship at Clemson. So if you bring in Jordan Williams, an experienced guy, and then you got Mario Kendricks and Norrell Pollard, who have both played a ton of snaps at Virginia Tech, I think those first three guys are going to be really impactful. And when you look at it across the board, you got Barno, you got Williams, you got Kendricks or Pollard, and then you got Garbutt. That is a really talented Virginia Tech front four. The guys behind them, again, it's all about the depth. The next guy's up at defensive tackle, Josh Fuga. He's right there, but who else? There's not really anybody else behind them. So if something happens, an injury, which happened to be common, it seems like it always happens to Virginia Tech, I think up front they're really, really talented, especially at tackle. They've got Jordan Williams and Norrell Pollard, who had a really good season last year. Same with Mario Kendricks. I think is there, if something happens, and I know I've said this a couple times now, but if something happens to somebody on this defensive front, how is Virginia Tech going to adjust? How are they going to react? Because the guys behind them, you've got Desmond Mahmoudi, Cole Nelson, and Mateus Carroll. They're all freshmen. Max Philpott is a redshirt freshman who played some games last year, former walk-on. But the only reason he played was because Virginia Tech didn't have enough players because of COVID. So outside of that front three, and then you got Josh Fuga, so you can say front four, the depth concerns me. But I do think it's going to be a really talented unit if everybody can stay healthy.
Now moving on to linebackers and, the back seven of this defense, it hits or miss. I think the linebacker core is pretty deep considering the experience they have. Minus, they lose Rayshard Aspie, one of the great middle linebackers. But, you place it with a guy in Dax Hollifield who's right next to him this whole time, whose natural position is the Mike linebacker, who's played some Mike filling in for Rayshard Aspie. You move Alan Tisdale maybe to, the backer position, which is more of his natural position where he played in between with Holyfield, depending on who they're playing. And then Shamari Connor obviously playing that very key whip position, which is like a linebacker safety hybrid. This linebacking core is really good. I think it's the best part of this defense, and I think it's gonna have to be the key in terms of getting this defense correct in terms of communication and also performing to the standards that is expected from a Virginia Tech defense.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go as far to say I think it's the best unit on this Virginia Tech defense. I would say defensive backs. I know we'll get there in a sec, but I do think that Dax Holyfield playing and going and moving to play in his natural position, and a talented guy in Dax Holyfield, I was doing research earlier today. Dax Holyfield has more snaps than anybody on this Virginia Tech defense that has been in Virginia Tech for 3 years. Dax Hollifield has more snaps than anybody. Dax has played so much, and Alan Tisdale's played a lot too, especially the last 2 seasons. So you've got 2 talented guys in Dax Hollifield and Alan Tisdale. And I think from speaking with Jack Tyler and speaking with Justin Hamilton, I think it's going to be interesting to see if the production increases. Because there were times last year where Rayshard Ashby, yeah, he was talented, but he looked a little slow, a little behind the play. I think Dax Hollifield, I think he's quick, he's slimmed down a little bit. I think he's in his natural position. I think that's going to benefit him a lot. And then I think Alan Tisdale, I mean, he's a monster. He's a really talented player. He's become more of a mature player. He had a kid in the offseason. He's really, I think, figured himself out as a person. He's matured. He's shown a lot of growth, especially to his weight. He gained a lot of weight in the offseason, which is important. So I think you've got 2 really talented guys up there in Dax Hollifield and Alan Tisdale. Outside of that, you got Dean Ferguson and Keyshawn Artis right behind there. The depth, again, is a little bit of a question for me. I do think that Dean Ferguson and Keyshawn Artis are going to, they're going to have some impacts. And Jack Tyler and Justin Hamilton have both been raving about him, including Justin Fuente. All 3 coaches were absolutely raving about Dean Ferguson and Keyshawn Artis the other day when speaking with the media. So clearly they've got something, good going on there. But I'm just interested to see if the linebackers can be a force. I think many people who've followed Virginia Tech for the longest time know that, Virginia Tech's linebackers have always been a force of the defense. The defensive backs and corners were good, but Virginia Tech's linebackers were always really, really talented. And I think, Dax Hollifield, he has so much experience under his belt. Tisdale has a lot too. Can they go put that on display this year, especially now once they've gotten an entire year to adjust to no longer Bud Foster's scheme. It's Justin Hamilton's scheme now. Now they've had time to adjust. Now they've had time to settle in. I'm honestly intrigued to see how well they perform this year.
Moving on to the defensive backs, USAA is the most depth group. After last season, 106 nationally in passing. You maybe argue a little bit that's to the defensive line, the lack of depth there, and getting to the quarterback, but it helps adding, arguably an all-American caliber cornerback in Jermaine Waller, at least an all-ACC top, one of the best corners in the conference in Jermaine Waller. The good news is the guys who did struggle last year get experience back, but safety becomes a really big spot as they bring back Devin Hunter. They have the transfer in Tay Daly. Keontae Jenkins is also getting experience at free safety, but that is replacing Divine Diablo, who was a top 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft. So a lot of moving pieces to the defensive back unit, but I think if they hit on all cylinders, this could be, this is going to be a massive upgrade for Virginia Tech that desperately needs it after struggling last season.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously you missed Divine Diablo, who was arguably the best player on Virginia Tech's defense last year, you could say. He's not there anymore. But I think at corner, having Jermaine Waller return and Justin Hamilton and even cornerbacks coach Ryan Smith, they've raved about Jermaine Waller and just the corners as a whole throughout fall camp. Jermaine Waller is back to his old self, and he's improved a lot. But then you've got guys behind him. I mean, you've got 4 or 5 guys, Amarni Chapman, Breon Murray, Dorian Strong, Nadir Thompson. That's 4 guys behind Jermaine Waller that have all played a ton of snaps. So you've got a ton of guys. That might be the position with most depth on the team is cornerback. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see who plays that corner spot opposite of Jermaine Waller and who ends up winning that job. But I do think there's a lot of talent there. At safety, you brought it up. Devin Hunter's back. I think one of the biggest questions on the defense is, can Devin Hunter finally be what Virginia Tech recruited him to be? Devin Hunter, I just graduated last year. Devin Hunter was my class. He was class of 2017. So he's, entering his 5th season now with Hokies. He didn't play last season, but he was a 5-star. He was the top prospect in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Can Devin Hunter be that guy Virginia Tech recruited him to be? Everybody keeps raving about him. Everybody keeps praising his work ethic. But can he be the guy at boundary safety Virginia Tech needs him to be? And then on the other side, Tay Daly, I think it's interesting you pointed this out because, Justin Hamilton said yesterday that Tay is kind of going to slide around, that, if Tech needs help on the boundary side, he'll help out with that. If Tech needs help rover-wise, he's going to help out with that. I'm excited for Keontae Jenkins because he played really, really well last year, at rover, and he was the kind of the guy with Divine Diablo last year, and he was a true freshman. He's got another year under his belt, and Justin Hamilton's praised him a lot, but says he's continuing to get better. I think Keontae Jenkins, it's going to be interesting to see how he develops because he's only been at Virginia Tech. He just played 1 year. This is his second year of D1 ball, so I think it's interesting to see how he improves. I think the corners have so much depth there, so much talent, so much rep, so much experience. I think the big question in that defensive back room, Devin Hunter. Again, can he be what Virginia Tech recruited him to be? Because if he can be consistent, I think Virginia Tech's defense, especially the defensive backs, are going to be a really strong unit.
That's a good way to put it about the defense. Moving on to a unit that is close to Hokie fans' hearts, even though I guess, technically being a Beamer Ball, you have to say is in South Carolina because Shane Beamer's the head coach there, but, it's not. It's not yet. But special teams, John Parker Romo, Mr. Touchback, is now moving into the kicker role, replacing Brian Johnson. That's going to be interesting to see how he does. We obviously know about his big leg. And then I think a bigger thing is the punting unit, both from the punter, incoming Peter Moore, and then also punt returner. The coaching staff wants it to be Tavion Robinson. Will it be Tavion Robinson is the biggest question. And Virginia Tech has struggled with the punt returner since Greg Stroman. So it's been so long. His brother is now a freshman on this team. So what about Jalen Stroman maybe getting into the punt return game? At least it seems like he might make the special teams unit. What do you see from just the special teams unit, and what do you expect from them?
I think obviously you have consistency with John Parker Romo. I think, Coach Chibest praised him so much at Media Day earlier this week, just talking about how not just in the kicking game, but off the field, with just leadership as a whole, John Parker Romo provides. And Chibest said he might end up doing it all. He might end up punting. He's punted before. He'll get to do field goals for the first time. And obviously, like Chibest said, you don't make every single field goal, but Romo is a confident kicker. He's been doing this for a long time. He had one of the best touchback records on kickoffs in the country, over the past couple of years. So, you've got a solid guy there. I'm interested to see, if he ends up doing more than he needs to, because Peter Moore, like you said, he's a freshman. They've seen what he's done in practice. Can he be that guy in game? Punting's not easy. Tech lucked out with Oscar Bradburn for the past couple of years. I'm interested to see if Peter Moore can be consistent, or if John Parker Romo is going to have to fill that void. And then punt returning wise, Tavion Robinson, he had a great 2019 season returning the ball. He averaged 28, about 28 yards per carry back in 2019. Last year, he wasn't very good. He had he muffed 3 punts. 2 of them turned into touchdowns. One against Duke. Duke scored on that play. One against Miami. One against Liberty. The Flames scored on the very next play. So he had 3 fumbles last year. That brought down his confidence so much. I'm interested to see how he turns this around, because like you said, the coaches have praised him and praised him and praised him. Chibest said he's a completely different guy now. He's very, very confident. He's a new guy. We think we're going to get to 2019 Tavion Robinson in the punt return game. If Tech does that, that's a huge weapon for Virginia Tech in the punt return game, because Tavion Robinson was lethal back in 2019 receiving punts. Last year, not so much. Tech had so many miscues that people might forget about that last year. But I think Tavion Robinson, he's got another year under his belt. He's got an offseason to work on things. He's become more consistent, and the coaches keep praising him. So I think only good things to come from Tavion Robinson punt returning.
It's a good way to put it, David, in wrapping up the special teams unit. Let's move on to the win total. The guys in Vegas think 7 wins is the mark for Virginia Tech. I look at two factors, or well, I guess three factors going into the schedule. The uniqueness of their schedule. Part one being 6 of their first 7 are at home, and then the 4 of their last 5 are on the road. Didn't get cut any breaks towards the stretch part of that season. That is tough. And then also, what will be the pressure of like this team if the hot seat keeps heating up for Justin Fuente? Does the bottom fall without under them? There are expectations of this team. Pick third in the Coastal Division. This team is seen as a, that second challenger, or that third challenger, I should say, to Carolina and Miami. And we know what this team's going to look like opening the year at home, fans back against Carolina, number 10 Carolina, Sam Howell coming into town, one of the best players in all of college football. What do you expect from this team record-wise, and do you think they can get past the 7-win mark?
Yeah, it's tough because, like you said, the schedule's not favorable by any means. 6 of your first 7 at home's fantastic, but then you turn around and play 4 of your last 5 on the road. Now, granted, the road games are at Georgia Tech, at Boston College, at Miami, and at Virginia on the backstretch, but by no means are any of those easy walks in the park. Maybe Georgia Tech, you could say, but Boston College on a Friday night isn't going to be fun in Boston in November. Miami is going to be a top contender in the Coastal this year. And then Virginia, it's a rivalry game. You know how it is. So I don't think the schedule is favorable by any means. Yeah, and I've struggled a little bit to pinpoint what I think this team's going to finish record-wise, because I think they could be 8-4, 9-3 team. But I also think if something goes wrong and a snowball continues to build, I think this team could end up 5-7. I've continued to say that I think Virginia Tech's going to be a 7-5 team this season. Do I think they can be better or worse? Yes, both ways. I think Virginia Tech can win 8 games. Do I think it's going to happen? I think if you take into account injuries, if you take into account the weirdness, I guess, of the uniqueness of this schedule. I mean, if Virginia Tech goes out in the first 4 games and goes 2-2 and loses to North Carolina and at West Virginia, but beats Middle Tennessee and Richmond, will they go into Notre Dame, a top 10 team at home? If Tech is 2-3 going into Pittsburgh and Syracuse, yeah, those aren't crazy difficult games. Syracuse is one of the worst teams in the ACC, but any game in the ACC is not easy. So I think Tech might be walking that tightrope. I think the bottom line is Virginia Tech needs to get out to a good start on the season. I think if Tech beats North Carolina, the expectations are obviously going to go up, but I think it'll give them a lot of confidence. I think this team can be really, really good. I think they have the potential to be 8, maybe a 9-win team. But over the past couple of years, Justin Fuente's teams have shown that, it's when you think, going back to 2 years ago, or I guess 3 years ago in 2018, when Virginia Tech played Florida State. Virginia Tech demolishes Florida State in the season opener, bottoms out the next week against Old Dominion. Completely changed the entire season. You don't really know what to expect from this team, and I think consistency across the board is something that's been lacking for Justin Fuente. And I don't know if the hot seat really is going to mean much for the players. I don't know if it'll change much for Justin Fuente, but that is something to keep an eye on because, again, if Virginia Tech comes out and goes 2-2 to start the season heading into October, people are going to start asking questions. People are already asking questions now. And, I think if Justin Fuente, if he wins 7 games, I think, he's safe, I think. But there have been so many mess ups in the past with the 45-10 Duke loss, with the road loss to Old Dominion, losing to Liberty the way they did last year. There's been so many bumps in the road for this Hokies team. Virginia Tech can't really afford a bump in the road this year. Not that they're not good enough or not talented enough, but we've seen how much a bump in the road kills the momentum in previous years. And, obviously COVID was a big bump in the road in general. But if Virginia Tech wants to be a consistent team this year, which I think they can do, they can't afford any bumps in the road. When Middle Tennessee and Richmond come into Blacksburg, Virginia Tech needs to take care of business. And they need to compete against North Carolina. And when they go on the road to West Virginia, they need to compete and or win. if they can do that, I think they can be a 8-win team, if not better. But all signs in the past point to the little inconsistencies here or there and point to them being a 7-5 team.
Well, David, I want to thank you so much, Youngblood DC, as I like to call you back in our college days, for joining me. How can our listeners get more info from you and the folks at Tech Sideline as we are fastly approaching, maybe the biggest game of the season, considering the coastal stakes that are in it against North Carolina?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on, Trey. It's great to chat with you. You can follow me on Twitter at the real Decunna. That's the real DCUNNA. And then techsideline.com. I'm the Virginia Tech football beat writer for us. I'm covering every single press conference. We've got tons of content coming out. We're just finishing up position previews this week. So we've got 2 articles about every single position on this Virginia Tech team. If you want more coverage, Tech Sideline is the place to get it when we're talking about Virginia Tech, and not just for football, but in the future for basketball or any other sports too. And yeah, North Carolina, fast and quickly approaching. I'm excited, Trey. I know Lane Stadium is going to be absolutely rocking. It's going to be fun, and I'm excited to get back to having college football back. And I appreciate you having me on as always.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much for listening to all 3 of our previews. You can check them out on our YouTube page as well as wherever you get your podcast on the Fast Lane with Ed Lane podcast feed. I'm Trey Lyle signing off for now. We'll have these throughout the season, folks, not just to preview the season, but we'll preview games each week. David might be coming back around a couple of times this season. We're trying to get some recurring guests on here for all 3, covering your local teams and topics. David will also be, of course, part of covering the Commonwealth every Monday on the Fast Lane 5 to 6 on the CBS Sports Radio Lynchburg, as well as the CBS Sports Radio Lynchburg app. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special edition of the Fast Lane. I'm Trey Lyle.